Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, you have my May wrap-up. So, it's taken me a couple of days to get around to filming the wrap-up simply because I wasn't quite sure the format that I was going to do it in. Because I've switched up in the month of May. You'll notice there weren't any recent reads vlogs. There were SESL videos going through those books. They were the majority of my reads this month, but there are several books that I read but haven't talked about, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to discuss that. What I've decided is to give a very brief synopsis slash summary of my feelings about the books that were not on the SESL list. For those books, I will direct you to my SESL videos. At the time of filming, 2 of those are already filmed and put up. I need to film another one because I have the full 8 books for that, and then I am very close to being able to film part 4. So in parts 3 and 4, those will go up in June, and some of those will include books that I read in May. Now, before I get there, I am going to talk about the statistics. And one of the reasons that this was made more difficult was the number of books that I read in May. And it's not going to be any easier in June because obviously things are getting pushed into June because of the number of books that I read in May. But then also June is the Amazing Readathon. It is June 3rd, and I've already read 5 books. I'm about halfway through book 6. My minimum goal is to read 2 books a day, for a total of 60 books. Yeah, not really sure why I'm challenging myself to that, but I am. But that's for June's wrap up to deal with. For May, I read 42 books. Part of that was helped by the fact that school ended with about a week to go in May, and I went with my family to Disney, and so was able to listen to several audiobooks on the drive down and the drive back up. And then the other part that helped is I was focusing on the middle grade books for SESL. And a lot of those are easier, shorter, quicker for me to read. When we get into the books that are for June, I don't know what types of books I'll end up reading for June, but again, we'll leave that for June's wrap up. That totaled about 14,000 pages, and yes, that includes the books that I read as audiobooks converted to page numbers, and the approximate hours listened to were about 85. But again, I don't track the actual amount of time that I read because I listen to it at 2.5 times speed, and by the time I'm writing up these statistics, it's far enough beyond that I don't know the exact amount of time that it took me to read those books. My average rating was a 4.1, which I'm counting as a huge win because usually on the months where I read SESL books, the rating is lower because there are a lot of books on that list that I don't necessarily jive with or like or think are even decent. On this list, the lowest rating that I gave was a 3 stars. There have been lists where I've given 1 and 2 stars before, but not on this one. So I'll save that for that video, but this list is phenomenal this year. As such, my highest read genre this month, by only 3 books, but still, it's contemporary, and that is because of the SESL list. Most of the books on the middle grade list were contemporary, and since I read the entire list this month, save 1, obviously contemporary is going to end up being my highest read genre. I'm hoping in June to again have not fantasy as the highest read genre. It's either going to be historical or contemporary because that's the team that I chose to sort of push myself out of my comfort zone, and also because I'm reading the young adult books and I've already read all the fantasy books on the young adult list. I don't have as many of those to read, only 11 of them, but that should help my numbers. As far as the method by which I read all of those books, the vast majority of them I read as audiobooks. It just is working really well for my brain, and that means that 70%, nearly 70% of the books that I read this past month were audiobooks. Only one of the 42 books that I read this past month were physical books. The rest, between that 70%, which I forget what that number is exactly, and that one, they were ebooks. Some of them were ARCs, which I have only ebook copies of. Some of them I have copies of, but I checked out an ebook version of it from the library simply because I'm really liking being able to get comfortable and just using my little clicker on my iPad to flip through pages. We shall see if that continues. This month I was a lot kinder to my own TBR. The only books that I brought in this month were my BookBox subscription books, plus 1 or 2 special editions, which were sequels to books that I got in previous BookBox boxes. You know what I'm trying to say. I purchased 9 total, but of my owned TBR, I read 16. So there's a net of 7 coming off of my owned TBR list, which is great. I didn't calculate what it is overall because I did bring in a lot of books last month. I have pulled off for June a lot of my owned TBR, with the exception of the SCASL books. I think all of them are going to come off my owned TBR, which is a good thing. The age range, as can be expected, because I read the entire SCASL list of middle grade books, save 1, were about 70% middle grade, which if you read 19 of them in 1 month, that is going to be a large percentage. Some of the other books that I read as well, finished books that I series that I was finishing, some of my arcs, they were also middle grades. Then adult came next, and young adult again was my smallest age range. I don't think I'm falling out of love with young adult. I just think I'm trying to build more into the adult range of books, expand my genres, and I'm also focusing on middle grade for certain things. A lot of my arcs were middle grade. This list was middle grade. Next month, I don't know how it's going to manage because I'm still reading middle grade, but I am reading those 11 young adult books for that list, so that should bump it up. That brings us to the various lists that I am trying to get through. The first of those is the series that I started. I almost thought, oh, I won't start a series in May because I don't know if the audiobook for this book is going to come in. And I'm probably going to skip it in June because this is a fantasy book. But the audiobook ended up coming in and I loved it so much. So I started Foundry Side. I believe that's the name of the series. If the series has a different name, I don't know what it is. I knew after reading The Tainted Cup that I had a strong probability of enjoying this book. I loved it. Hands down, loved it. All of the perspectives, the way, the intrigue that was going on, hands down, phenomenal. So this, I believe, actually got a 5-star rating from me. This is one that I finished at the very end of the month, hence the little mini review. Then we come to the series that I started before BookTube and am making progress in because they're longer series. I read book 6 of the Sisters Grimm series. Not really going to talk much about that one because it's more episodic than transformational. And again, I live in the South and it's very humid here, so I have to have the dehumidifier running. Could I stop it while I'm filming? Probably. Do I ever remember before I start filming? No. Anyway, the other book is book 2 in the Fablehaven series. This one got a lot darker than I expected, a lot more serious. So I'm unsure as to whether or not I'm going to continue in this series. I have book 3 on my plan for next month, tentatively book 4 because there is a prompt that you can use that one for. So we shall see with this one. It's not a bad book. I ended up rating it 4 stars. It didn't necessarily go in the direction that I thought it would. Then we have a series that I started pre-BookTube but finished this month because I am trying to work through those series. And I finished the Moonbase Alpha series with Spaced Out and Waste of Space. This is book 2. This is book 3. These ended up being a huge surprise and a hit. I think I talked about book 2 at least, but book 3 did an awesome job in wrapping up the series as well. The next ones to mention are my nonfiction. One of those was an arc, Last to Eat, Last to Learn, which is a memoir. Then we had the graphic novel, Messy Roots, The Trayvon Generation, and The Five. As I'm realizing that I put Messy Roots in the stack as one of my 24 and 24, but I also know that The Five and Wrong Place, Wrong Time were also on my 24 and 24 list. So I know that these for sure were on that list. This one also might have been. so I might be a little bit off on the count for 24 and 24, which is approximately 2 per month, but that's fine. They were all really good, so that's why I had this one out here. The Trayvon Generation was one of the nonfiction books that I had on my list, wanted to get a hold of. I think I talked about it in a previous haul. Then we have my Buzzwordathon book, and that is Everybody Looking by Candace Illo, and the buzzword was every, and I think I talked about this in a previous video. If I didn't, I'm so sorry. Please go to my Storygraph or Goodreads and take a look at my review there. This one did not quite work for me, so unfortunately it's going to get unhauled as well. So coming into my library and out of my library in the same month, unfortunately. Next we have my Rick Riordan Presents imprint project. I had The Cursed Carnival, which I'm also using for our fantasy. I also had Winston Chu versus the Whimsies and Winston Chu versus the Wingmeisters. The reason I read this one this month was because one of the next arcs up on my list on NetGalley was book 2 and the conclusion in this duology. So I read that, which not only helps me with my Rick Riordan Presents project, but also helps me with my arcs. And then as far as that goes, I also had A Drop of Venom, which is the second of the so far 3 YA titles in the Rick Riordan Presents imprint line. Then when it comes to arcs, I'm just going to briefly mention the rest of those arcs. I'm not going to put the covers up on the screen, but I did read, apart from Winston Chu, I've read a total of 6 arcs this month, so I'm making good progress on a lot of my goals. I also read A Meal in the After. I need to get a copy of that. I read Neferura. Do not recommend that one. I mentioned Last to Eat, Last to Learn, a nonfiction memoir. I read The Partition Project, which ultimately was a disappointment, and The Summer at Squee, which I was going to talk about mistakenly in my SEASL video, comparing it to Camp Famous, but then I realized this was not on the list, the SESL list, because I read it as an arc. So those were the 6 arcs that I read. Lastly, I mentioned in my TBR video that I was going to try to get to a lot of the new releases that I had as well. Started off fairly well-ish, but then it sort of trickled off. I managed to get 4, which is not too bad. One of them, this one helped me finish a series. I don't think that this one is going to be on the list. It might be, but I don't think it is. Speaking of finishing series, I ended up finishing 3 total series. This one, starting and finishing the Winston Chu series, and then also is buried in the stack, the Moonbase Alpha series. The other 3, I am fairly certain are going to be on their list, and it's actually 3 different lists. So we have A Tempest of Tea, which I firmly believe is going to be on the YA fantasy sci-fi list. Love this. I love Hafsa Faisal's writing. It is phenomenal. She sucked me in right away. And then the twists that were happening at the end, I could barely wrap my head around them, but I know that they're going to get explained well. We also have The Warm Hands of Ghosts. I'm not really sure which category this is going to get put in. I have a feeling it's going to get put in the adult fantasy sections simply because of who Katherine Arden is as an author and what she's also already written. That happened with The Unmaking of June Farrow that I read for last year's list that wasn't really adult fantasy, but I think it's going to go into that category. This was an interesting one for me. I was fascinated by what she was doing here, and I almost wish she hadn't even had that bit of magical realism in here, because this is not fantasy. The way that she was telling the stories of the different people, the different characters included in here, and the setting in World War I, her setting is so evocative and so real. So well done. So I know that this is going to be on the list. I don't know whether it's going to be on historical or on fantasy. I have a feeling it's going to be on fantasy because of who Katherine Arden is, but we shall see. The last one I talked about at the beginning of the month. I am not going to talk about it in specifics because it is published by St. Martin's Press, but I have a feeling I read the winner of the historical fiction section just because of the name recognition that this author gets and the way that the book was written. So did I accomplish as much as I wanted to as far as reading books, anticipated releases that I think are going to be on the Goodreads list? No, because I don't plan to read through the historical fiction list come November, December. I do want to tackle the adult fantasy and the young adult fantasy. And a third category, I don't know whether I'm going to do memoir again or I'm going to do young adult fiction, or hopefully maybe they'll listen to us and have middle grade back again. Who knows? I at least made a dent in it, and I have several books off to the side here that I may pick up during June. I probably won't prioritize them because I won't get the bonus points, so it may be June by the time I get to those. In just a moment for me, but mere seconds for you, I'll be back with the books and overall rating. Okay, I'll start off with the books that I am not rating. We have the one that I've mentioned that I'm not going to say what the book actually is. I'm not rating that one. Also not rating the ARC I read, Last to Eat, Last to Learn. And then finally we have Messy Roots. None of those are getting rated. The Last to Eat, Last to Learn, and Messy Roots because they are memoirs. The other one in solidarity with the strike. Next we come to the lowest rated book that I read, and I just realized I thought that the lowest rated book on my SASL list for middle grade was a 3-star, but it turns out lowest rated, and there are several, was 3.5 because my 3-star was Neferura, which was an ARC that I had, which was not good. Then we come to my 3.5-star reads. These books will not be staying in my library. One of them's a library book, the others I don't have physically, and then we have Everybody Looking. We have The Partition Project, which was an ARC that I read. We have Where the Sky Lives, Yonder, The Whispering Fog, Camp Famous, and Those Kids from Fawn Creek. All of those last few were SESL books. And then the final physical book is Meet Me Halfway. Then we move on to my 4-star pile, and that one is far more significant. And it also includes books that I don't have physically. We have The Cursed Carnival, The Ever After War. We have A Drop of Venom and A Meal in the After, both ARCs that I read, which I will be trying to get copies of. The Trayvon Generation, Waste of Space, Winston Chu versus the Whimsies, Dark Star Burning, Ash Falls White, Attack of the Black Rectangles, one of my SASL books, as well as the conclusion in the Winston Chu duology, Winston Chu versus the Wingmeisters, Fablehaven, Rise of the Evening Star, Hummingbird, Ellen Outside the Lines. Both of those were SASL books, which I probably will be trying to get copies of for my classroom library. Summer at Squee, which was an ARC that I read. Finally, The Warm Hands of Ghosts. Next we move on to my 4.5-star pile. It might not look as big as the pile for the 4 stars, but that's because several of them were SESL books that I don't own yet. 2 of them that are pictured physically here, I didn't own before the month started, but they were so good that I had to get physical copies of. So we have The 5, Spaced Out, We Were the Fire, one of those SESL books that I went ahead and purchased. And then the other one is Playing the Turnaround. We also have Blackbird Blue Road, an SESL book. The Last Mapmaker, A Song Called Home. Then we have Dream Any Dream, What Happened to Rachel Riley, and Sweet and Sour. All 3 of those are SESL books, and we finish off this category with A Tempest of Tea. And finally, the 5-star category. I am so excited about all of the books in this category. I love all of them. We have Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Jillian McAllister. We have an SESL book that I'm definitely going to be getting a copy of, A Duet for Home. We have The Bluest Sky, another SESL book that I don't have a physical copy of, but I need to get one. And then we have Founderside. So I read quite a few books this past month, and a lot of them were really good. I, besides Neferura, didn't really have any books that I didn't like. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.